Before we start today's show, I just wanted to mention our sponsor, Money Farm. Now, Money Farm is a leading digital wealth manager with over 60,000 active investors and over £2 billion invested on its platform. It offers 3 investment products, including a stocks and shares ISA, a general investment account, and a personal pension. And by answering a few simple questions about your investment goals and attitude to risk, you'll be matched to one of 7 globally diversified portfolios. Money Farm's expert team provides hands-on investment management by regularly adjusting and rebalancing your portfolio on your behalf. You'll even get a dedicated investment consultant should you want to widen your investment plan, something that sets it apart from most of its competitors. The minimum investment amount is £500 and fees range between 0.35% and 0.75% a year, depending on the amount you have invested. Money to the Masses listeners can take advantage of a special offer where Money Farm will run your money fee-free for a year. Head to moneytothemasses.com and search Money Farm for more information.
Hello and welcome to episode 341 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good. I had an interesting weekend. I forgot to mention it, actually, on the last show. I went to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I know people who listen to the podcast probably know I do support Spurs for my sins, but they had the NFL there. And I was going to the NFL with Justin, in fact. And I'll tell you what, Andy, I'm not an American football fan or fanatic in any way. I understand what's going on and I've watched it in the past. But I tell you, it was quite a spectacle to go and watch in a stadium that you know well. But when you go there, because they change it completely, I wouldn't have thought I was in the same place.
It was only recognisable by the sort of the size of the place, but actually they change all the screens and the shop and the food.
The whole shop gets completely emptied of all the football paraphernalia, shirts, and it gets replaced with American football stuff. Right. And if you've been to the shop ever, maybe one day we'll have to do a competition and somebody can come with us to the Spurs Stadium. And it's very big, this shop, if you go in there. I mean, you've seen it. We've been to the games together. But to change that for one match, it's quite incredible. But one thing that did make me laugh, and it just shows the difference between us and our American friends in terms of the showmanship and razzmatazz. So if you imagine Catherine Jenkins, before the game started, sang the national anthem. She was on the pitch on a small podium with members of the armed forces around her, and she had this big sort of dress on, and it looked very grand, and she's singing the national anthem. Well, of course, it then got to the point where obviously they were going to then sing the American national anthem because it was the NFL, and the one-upmanship was just it was just almost a ridiculous another level. So they couldn't come out and just sing on the pitch alongside Catherine Jenkins. Suddenly, forgive me, I don't know who the lady was. She's probably incredibly famous. Suddenly started singing, and you then realise that you had to crane your neck up because she wasn't even in the stadium. She was technically on top of the stadium, because at Tottenham there's a cockerel, which is the emblem of Spurs. It's on top of the south stand, and it's actually where you can go on those walkovers where you have to have security ropes on. It's an experience. She was teetering on the edge, overlooking the entire stadium, which must have been frightening, belching out the national anthem of America. And of course, that wasn't enough, because as she was singing and hitting that last high note, 4 American fighter jets boomed over the top of the stadium, scared the living daylights out of me. And then we had the fireworks all go off of red, white and blue at the same time, which it was amazing. It was a bit like hairs on the back of your neck stand-up moment. But it did make me laugh because we couldn't just sing it alongside somebody else on the pitch. They had to kind of really go and try and trump it. So I'm not offending anybody, hopefully, but it just shows the difference between the way America do things and how we do things.
Yeah, they know how to put on a show for sure. And actually, that's an unintended segue. But talking of shows, let's get back to today's show and find out what's coming up.
So on this week's show, I'm going to be talking about mortgage rates. And really, for most people who listen to this podcast, you've got a task you need to do this week or in the coming weeks if you want to fix your mortgage. And I'm going to explain all about it. You'll want to listen to. There's some tools I want you to use. I'm also going to be talking about energy and some things, again, that you need to realise and consider. And finally, I'm going to be talking about investing, and in particular, investing skin in the game. So fund managers, do they invest in their own funds? Because there is a school of thought that if they do invest in the funds that they run, then their interests are aligned with their own customers and those people who invest in their funds.
Great. So let's start with the mortgage piece then. There's been some news recently about interest rates, and so that really inspired this piece.
Yeah, so if you go back to podcast 335, it's only about a month or so ago, I did a piece about interest rates, if you recall, talking to people about them possibly going up in the near future. And I linked to an image, and I said to people to bookmark a page. It was actually on the Bank of England website. So it's bankofengland.co.uk/statistics/yield-curves. And that chart at the very bottom of that page is a good indicator of where the market thinks the Bank of England base rate is going to be into the future. And on that chart, you have a line that shows what the view was when the Bank of England had their last Monetary Policy Committee meeting, where they make a decision on interest rates, which obviously the recent decision is just to leave things alone at 0.1%. But it's updated daily to show what the market is basically pricing at the moment. And what is interesting, in the last 2 weeks, things have really shifted quite dynamically. And I mentioned in podcast 335 about the fact that you could get a sudden shift in the market's view and sentiment towards when the Bank of England is going to raise interest rates. Now, of course, if the Bank of England raises interest rates, that means that people's mortgage rates are likely to rise unless they're on a fixed rate deal. So if you fix your mortgage for a period of time, then you'd be okay. But if you haven't, which to be honest with you, the majority of people are on their lender's standard variable rate, which means they can move it up and down as they pretty much please. And it usually has a reference of some kind with that Bank of England base rate. So when the Bank of England raises interest rates, it means that most people's mortgages start to leap up. And what I want to talk about today is about how you fix your mortgage and giving some people insight into what could happen to their own mortgages going into the future. So in the last 2 weeks, things have changed considerably in the market's view of what's going to happen in terms of interest rate rises. So inflation has proved much more stubborn than previously thought. Central banks keep telling us it's going to be transitory, which means that inflation is going to probably peter out. It's elevated at the moment above that 2% official Bank of England rate that they try and target. And very simply, if inflation runs high, they tend to raise interest rates to try and bring it back under control and towards that 2% target. Now, with inflation proving quite sticky, if you've been listening to the Damien's midweek market shows, you'll have heard about it. It's not just in the UK, it's a global phenomenon that we're having. They are now predicting that the inflation rate could get to about 4% before the end of this year and even get as high as 6% by April 2022, which is obviously 3 times the official rate of inflation. Now, the market has suddenly shifted in its pricing or predictions of when the Bank of England will raise interest rates. Where it had been they thought it might happen in 2022 at some point, maybe in the first half, they are now predicting that the Bank of England will raise interest rates on the 16th of December this year, which is when they have their Monetary Policy Committee meeting in December and decide their interest rate policy. And they think they're going to raise it from 0.1% to 0.25%. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but it will prove significant to people. It will add tens of pounds a month on the average mortgage in the UK. But more importantly, the market has shifted its pricing for next year, and it is now guessing that the Bank of England may make 2 more interest rate hikes next year, and by the end of 2022 we could be looking at a base rate of around 1%. So that's considerably higher than where we are now. Yes, that's way lower than the pre-financial crisis level when we were up around 5%, but it is a shift. There's a lot of people out there who won't be used to that kind of environment. They've only ever known the base rate to be basically below 1% when they've had a mortgage. So what I want everyone to do is go on to moneytothemasters.com/mortgage-repayment-calculator. We'll put a link in the show notes, and you'll be taken to a very simple calculator where you put in the details of your original mortgage. So let's say you had a 200 grand mortgage over 25 years, and you put in the interest rate you're paying, and then you put in the increase in the base rate that you think is going to happen. So let's say it's going to go from 0.1% to 0.25. You might put in a 0.15% increase, for example. football or whatever you might want to do, and it will tell you in pounds what your monthly repayment will go up by. This is, of course, if your mortgage isn't fixed. So if you're fixed, you're okay. If you're not, then you're going to find out what's going to happen to your mortgage when the Bank of England finally start to raise interest rates. You can play around with it and you can get a sense of reality. Now, what is going to happen with the mortgage market? Well, the mortgage market at the moment, if you're going to go and look for a fixed rate deal, because maybe what people are going to be thinking now is they need to go and fix. And that is sensible, of course, if you want to keep your mortgage rate at a set level in case we have a real sudden rise in the Bank of England base rate. Of course, none of that's a given. Things do change. But if you want to fix, then what tends to happen when there is an inkling that we're going to get the base rate rise by the Bank of England, then the best mortgage deals on fixed rate mortgages get snapped up and the lenders start to raise the interest rate on offer on their best deals. So it's been estimated already that the best fixed 2-year deal, to give you an example, on a 200 grand mortgage, let's say it was on a house that's worth £250,000. Now, if that was over 25 years, at the moment you can get a 1.24% interest rate on that. Now, when you choose a mortgage, you don't just look at the interest rate, you've got to look at all the costs. But what will happen, they're predicting that by December, the best rate you're going to get is going to be up near a 1.8%, something like that, 1.7%. So you're talking about a 0.5 to 0.6 increase on that best interest rate on a particular deal I've mentioned, which will push up your repayments from 775, which is what the best deal would be now, to 832. So you're talking about more than a £50 a month increase in the best deals that are out there if you were going for that 200 grand mortgage over 25 years. So the message is rates are going to start going up if we do get a base rate increase. So you want to go and fix your mortgage. It's one of the things, all our bills are going up. I'm going to be talking about energy bills in a second. This is another one that is likely to be going up if inflation proves sticky as it has done. Now, what you need to do then this week is go and speak to your mortgage broker if you've got one. I always suggest people use a mortgage broker, an advisor who can search the whole market, fully independent, so they can go and look at the whole market, find the best deal for you based upon your circumstances and earnings. And if you don't have a mortgage advisor that you know and can trust, then you could go and look at a service like Vouched for example, where you can find reviews of mortgage advisors near you, or you could use an online service like Trussell or Habito. Now, in the show notes, I'm going to put links to all of those different services. Now, you could just go and look at those yourself, but if you use the links that are in the show notes, you'll be taken directly to the sites I mentioned. And for example, you can get a free mortgage review with Vouched for, which takes you to a particular page. But as a benefit of doing that, you can help the show. Because one of the things that Andy and I have just realised really is that we're probably about 400 shows all in when you take account of midweek markets as well. And we never tell people how they can support the show because we use lots of services, we review services. Andy has personally used Habito. I don't think you mind me saying that, do you, Andy?
No, not at all.
To review his own mortgage when he's bought a house. And so we only ever have that kind of partnership with people that we've looked at and like, and we've either gone in and we've really scrutinised what they do. So main thing is, look at your mortgage, review it this week, and then decide if you're going to fix and then do it. A mortgage broker will do all the heavy lifting and hard work for you. And if you go via the show notes and the links in the article, for example, on the website, then you can also help support Money to the Masses. And it won't cost you any more, won't make any difference to you personally, but it means that we can continue to keep the lights on and the mics running.
This is the second time we're going to make one of these segues because you mentioned keep the lights on there. And the next piece we're going to be talking about is energy. You can't move for the news about energy at the moment, and you're going to focus on something in this pod.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about energy because it's impacting us all. And there are some kind of crucial learnings that people need to take on board. Even if you've disengaged from the idea of energy and energy price, you're bored of hearing about the latest company that's gone bust.
We are well placed to talk about this, though, because you were impacted a couple of weeks back, and I was kind of sitting quite happy and proud that I wasn't being impacted. And just 2 days ago, my energy provider went bust. I mean, we're not making light of it, obviously, but it just goes to show that this does.
I think it's about 2 million people have been impacted by this. So,
and a lot of our listeners would have been impacted too. So.
Yeah, so in case you've been on the moon, natural gas prices have quadrupled, or they've done more than quadrupled now. It's gone up about fivefold in 2021. And what's happened is the energy market had a lot of companies that didn't hedge against the fact that prices might rise. So they're delivering prices at a level that are unsustainable now. a lot of people end up being on the standard tariffs for their providers. And what was happening is that the energy price cap, which was brought in by Ofgem actually to protect consumers, because most people end up being on the standard tariff, it would create a maximum cost for energy. So it's like per unit. And it would work out at £1,138 till recently. And I think it's almost today that it's gone up to £1,277 a year is the kind of price cap. And just to reiterate, that's not the maximum bill you would have. That's based upon the cap on the cost of the energy per unit based upon an average usage in a house. So they give this overall figure for a per annum bill for gas and electricity just as an indicator. And because of that cap, it's only reviewed twice a year, and it's just been reviewed and it's gone up. And we're going to probably go up again in April. It's almost certain it will do. But because the price of gas has been accelerating and going up, it means that the companies that haven't hedged, or even some of those that have, they're at the point where they are providing energy to consumers at a lower price than which they are purchasing it. And of course, that's unsustainable, and people are pulling out the market left, right and centre. And in fact, since September, the start of September, there's been 12 energy providers that have gone bust. And what Andy's alluding to is that he was talking about, oh, well, look at my energy bill, I'm still paying a really good rate. And then he came off his fixed tariff and then his bill doubled. Because the thing is, although electricity hasn't gone up at the same rate as the gas price, it's still increased. But when you look across the board, my sense is that most people's energy bills are going to double this year. And Andy found that when he was looking for fixed deals, etc. And obviously nearly everybody else in the office who'd been switching and getting on the best deals over the years, it meant that they weren't necessarily with the big six firms, and so all of their energy providers went bust, and Andy's hadn't. And then obviously we said, look, I think it's going to eventually at some point, and it did. I mean, get this, if anyone listening to this podcast, I think in our office we've had every permutation of the things that could go wrong. So you may recall I talked about I'd moved house. I went to go and give my old energy firm the last final meter readings, as you're supposed to do when you move house. I was very diligent, got the meter readings, and just as I went to do it, news broke that they went bust and they closed everything down. So I'm in the midst of, I've moved house, changing providers, but the old provider is now defunct. You can see it's a mess. Justin, on the other hand, had just completed the switch from one provider to another, and he had obviously had a credit balance just like me and like most people that should be protected under the rules. Just to reiterate that in case anyone didn't realise, if your energy firm goes bust and you have a positive balance, that is protected when you are taken on by a new energy company, which Ofgem obviously ensure that's what happens.
And just on that as well, a good tip is if you're worried about your provider potentially going bust, go online, try and get what your balance, screenshot it, do whatever you can so that you've got proof of that.
Yeah, because, for example, my energy provider, once it gone bust, it turned its website off, and therefore you couldn't get access to that information. And that's the one problem with things being online and no paper bills. The only way to access past bills was to go through their online portal, and of course that wasn't alive anymore. Going back to what happened to Justin, he was going from one energy provider he just completed the transfer to a new one, and both of them went bust. So the refund from the first provider was still kind of in the offing. It was still hopefully going to go through and get a refund. They went bust, the new one went bust, and he kind of, well, I'm not technically a customer of the old firm, and obviously these balances getting transferred across. So he's doing the only thing you can do, which is sit and wait and communicate when he's communicated with by the firms. And this seems to be the rule, is to sit tight and basically do nothing. I just wanted to reiterate that to people. If your energy firm goes bust, you will get taken on by a new company, and then they will contact you in due course. And then what will happen is that any balances are protected, and then you can then decide if you're going to switch or do whatever going forward, because you're not guaranteed to be on the best deal with this new energy company either. But the market is broken because, as I said, 12 energy companies and counting have gone bust. And I think we're going to end up to the point where we had this idea that we created competition in the market, lots of energy firms, lots of switching going on and people getting better deals. But now what's happened, partly because of COVID, partly because of the reopening of economies and demand and everything like that, the natural gas price surge, the price cap has also combined to make the market unsustainable for these smaller companies. And now we're going to probably end up with pretty much the big six again. And we're all going to end up on the big six. But just to let Andy cut in there because he was going to say something, you had even more, a slightly different scenario.
Yeah, I had a very similar sort of experience where I'm in this limbo period. So I had an email from my energy firm a week or so prior to say, right, your fixed deal is coming to an end in a week's time. It's time for us to start looking at new deals. And I'm in an error and I didn't know what to do. Anyway, my fixed deal came to an end on the 10th and the energy firm went bust on the 12th. So I never picked a deal and now I can't pick a deal and I'm kind of in that limbo.
I tell you what, Andy, you're going to love this piece of podcast. I've got some good news for you on this, actually. Because what I want to talk about now is that the energy cap is now working in our favour. So there was some research that was carried out back in September before most of this carnage had happened, but a lot of it already had occurred. And it was done by Uswitch, where they looked at the fixed tariffs that are out there available from the main energy companies and compared them to the price cap. Now, the price cap only applies to the standard tariffs, so the standard tariffs for any of the energy companies. It's not applicable to the fixed deals. Now, in a normal operating world, the energy market has a price cap to protect people who are going to be effectively paying too much for their energy because they're not switching. When people switch around, they will go and fix their energy price at a much lower rate than the energy cap. But of course, in this broken market, what's happened is almost universally now, the price cap, the standard tariff that you're going to end up on if you do nothing with an energy company when your fixed deal comes to an end, will be cheaper almost certainly than anything else you can get in the market. So the research showed when they looked at the price cap rate, they looked at average usage, they found that only 24 fixed tariffs across the different providers, the energy providers, were cheaper than the price cap, whereas 53 were more expensive. So for you, Andy, your energy firm's gone bust. You're going to be taken on board by a new energy firm who will presumably put you on a standard tariff. Had they not gone bust and you'd fix, you'd probably be paying more a month on your energy because you would have gone into a fixed deal that was more expensive. And to give you an inkling about how much more expensive, when you look across some of the major providers, you're talking about £600 a year. So you're talking £50 a month more if you fix now. So it's one of those weird scenarios where the rules are almost working backwards but in favour of consumers. So for example, for me, having moved house, where normally you'd move house, you take over ownership effectively of the account, you contact the provider of the energy in the new house you've gone to and said, hey, I'm here now, they whack you on an expensive standard tariff. Well, that is now going to have the price cap applied to it. Whereas if you go, hey, I'm here now, I want to fix my energy deal, you're going to probably be paying about £600 more a year by doing that. So doing nothing, inertia, where we've been teaching people for years, don't do anything, you're going to end up paying more. Doing nothing is actually going to work probably in your benefit now. The other thing I want to quickly mention is when I moved into this house, if you go back to podcast 174, I was talking about smart meters. So you know smart meters can measure your gas usage and electricity usage live. And the problem was, if you go back to that past episode, I talked about the sort of tricks that the energy suppliers were doing to try and make you have a smart meter. Back then, they were smart meters. They were called SMETS1. So I'll call it SMETS1. They were a type of first generation smart meters that weren't very smart because when you switched energy providers, then they wouldn't work anymore. So they worked with the energy provider who provided the meter to you. As soon as you were switching around, they'd become defunct and dead. Now, good news is at some point there's meant to be some kind of update to bring those things back to life. But the message was, if you get one of those meters, still keep switching. Or like I said in that podcast, I'm going to wait till the second generation come out. So those second generation smart meters would work with any energy firm. If you keep switching, they will still keep working. They will show your energy usage. Now, in my house now, there is a smart meter. And so I haven't had to go and sort that out. There's one there. And of course, what's happening is I'm walking past every time I'm flicking the kettle on for a cup of coffee and I'm having a hernia about the amount of energy being used. I'm going around the house now and turning off the lights. I've turned into my dad because I can see, because it tells you in pounds and pence, the usage of your energy in a given day. So I can see how much I'm spending at any given moment on electricity and gas. And of course, that's causing me like sleepless nights almost, because it's there looking me in the face, and I can see how much more my energy bill is going to be now a month as a result of soaring energy prices. So the message is, get a smart meter, because we can't switch around at the moment. The best thing to do is pretty much do nothing, because half of our energy firms have gone bust. We're all waiting for that to sort itself out before we could then even think about switching in the future. The problem is, when we do try and switch, we'll probably end up on more expensive fixed deals. Yes, we've got to wait to see what happens to the energy cap in April and whether it increases again, and what that means compared to those fixed deals in terms of would staying on the standard tariffs with your provider be better for you. But get an energy meter, because it will help you cut back on your usage, because it's going to be a pretty difficult winter. The other thing is, obviously, you don't have to give meter readings anymore, and there's no more estimated bills. You basically end up hopefully paying for what you use. If you haven't got one, then typically your energy provider will end up just contacting you to install one at some point. They do it area by area. Now, they may be doing your area. If not, if you haven't got one, ring them up and ask them, register your interest that you want one, and you may get further up the queue and actually get a smart meter installed in your house. The other thing is, in past times, I would have said, if you switch to a particular deal, because a lot of deals now, if you switch, require you to have a smart meter. It's one of the ways they make you have a smart meter, because the government set them targets of ensuring that homes had smart meters in them. And so in order to meet those targets and not get a telling off, they were doing whatever they could to make you have a smart meter. And one of the ways is to create tariffs. They said, yeah, you can only have this tariff if you've got a smart meter. Unfortunately, because switching around is a little bit defunct at the moment, then that option might not be available to you to switch to a tariff that gives you a smart meter, because it'll be more expensive. But contact your provider, you should be able to get one. And I think for this winter, it's going to be the one thing that's going to help cut your energy bills. It's going to be you focusing heavily on usage rather than switching around. Stay on your standard tariffs, because it's likely also to be cheaper.
Interesting piece, that. And I suppose it's going to be one of those winters where people are going to be grabbing those blankets, firing up the wood burner, and just trying to keep their energy bills as low as possible. I know I'm stressing about it already, and we're not. What are we? Mid-October, and I'm stressing.
Well, in my house, there's a gas fire which we need to just check works okay and get serviced. But I did say to my wife that, yeah, I don't think I'll be putting that on, because that'd be like burning £5 notes if you set that thing on fire during the winter because of the prices. So, yeah, I think it's going to be one of those winters.
Okay, so moving on to the next piece then, the final piece of the podcast, and we're going to be talking about skin in the game. What do you mean by that? What are we talking about?
So, in the investment world, about 90% of investors would like to know if the fund manager of the fund they invest in actually invests in their own fund. It's a bit like the analogy whether they eat their own home cooking.
Never trust a skinny chef.
Is that another one?
That's a saying, yeah. Goes to show they're not trying their own food.
Yeah. So in the investment management world, in the UK in particular, there is no official disclosure about whether managers invest in their own funds or not. And the reason it could be important is because if a manager invests in their own fund, then it means their interests are more aligned with their own customers, so the people investing in their funds. Now, given that some of the high profile issues they've had in the investment fund world with people taking excessive risks, etc., then there is a school of thought that if somebody's own wealth was invested in that fund, then they wouldn't necessarily, or perhaps they'd be less likely to gamble in it in the same way and become a little bit reckless rather than sticking to the mandate of what they're meant to be doing. Based upon the fact that most people want to know that, unfortunately, that information isn't out there. Now, what was quite interesting, I saw something this week that was actually sent across to me by Interactive Investor. So they're one of the main platforms in the UK which you buy funds and shares, investment trusts through. And they have two separate fund lists. So they have a Super 60, which is a bit like Hargreaves, all of them have them, which is a fund short list of funds that they like. They also have an ethical version called the ACE 40, which is, again, funds they like, but they have some kind of ethical tilt. They've been quite vocal in trying to push the FCA into making it mandatory for fund managers to disclose how much money they have invested in their own funds. And at the moment, that's not really going anywhere, but hopefully it will start to gather momentum because it's got a bit of interest again, because they carried out a piece of research where they approached all of the managers and funds on that list, the two lists that I mentioned, and they asked the fund houses how much money the fund managers had invested in their own funds. To use the analogy again, how much of them were eating in their own home cooking. Now, what was interesting is that 94% of them said they had skin in the game, so they invested in their own funds. However, out of those 77 funds that said they did, 49 of them wouldn't say how much. So to me, that is quite important. If they're not telling you how much, why wouldn't they tell you how much? What was it also interesting is that 20 of the funds, so that's about 24% of the funds that they asked, actually managers had more than £1 million of their own money invested in the fund. So that's significant. And
it also tells me that they're paid too much.
Well, it also means they're paid, possibly, because there was a piece of research that was carried out a few years ago in the US, going back as far as 2016, where they looked at a similar idea, but looking at American funds. And what they found is that managers running funds with lower fees were more likely to invest in their own funds, which suggested that if more fund managers invest in their own funds, then it could lead to lower costs. Because put it this way, fund managers aren't silly. They know one of the levers you pull if you want to be a successful investor is to not invest in complex products that are overcharged. So they aren't likely to want to invest in their own fund if they think it's one of those things. So by encouraging that manager investment to be disclosed, you will probably drive down the cost of funds too. What was interesting in that same piece of research is going back a few years. They even asked Vanguard, which is obviously held up on a bit of a pedestal. It's owned by its own funds. They asked its managers whether they invested in their own funds. And it claimed at that point that no manager invested in 77% of the funds that Vanguard ran. Now, if you look at the research that Interactive Investor does, it does suggest now that they do. There is something. But again, they didn't disclose the exact amount. So what I want to do, I can't read all this research out on the podcast. It would be a naff podcast. But I haven't found the table that I've seen published anywhere. So I'm going to publish it. So if you go to the show notes of this podcast or you go to the article on the website, we'll provide a link where you can go and look at the table and see the funds where the manager does invest in their own funds. You'll also be able to see the ones that didn't disclose, for example, and you can make of it what you will. It's not necessarily something you would use to decide whether you're going to invest in a fund, but it does show a level of transparency. And I think there is a bit of a correlation between some of the funds that do have quite low costs and the fund managers that are actually disclosing how much they invest. Now, obviously, I'm quite interested in the idea of transparency, which is why I run a £50,000 portfolio on 80/20 Investor. That kind of, you're going to eat your own cooking, which we've been doing now for like 5-6 years, to try and show people how you would do it, not just to talk about things theoretically and, yeah, do this and it should work, or invest in my fund like the fund managers do and say you'll be basically rich and better than another fund, is to actually demonstrate that how you can be a successful investor. And I believe fund managers should also do it. So a quick piece on the pod on investing, but if you're interested, then go check out the link and you will be able to see some of the information about who invests in their funds and who doesn't.
Okay, so that's it. We're done for this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so in the usual way. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with the number 2. We're on Instagram, and we've also got the Facebook community group, facebook.com/groups/money to the masses. Become a member of that group. Come and say hello. Post some questions if you like, and join a like-minded community that's growing massively week by week. And so that's it. We're done for this week, aren't we, Damien?
Yeah, until next time.
Until next time.